Hi everyone, my name is Jacob Snow, and I'm here today to talk to you about one of my favorite War for Independence characters. Not character, but also, well, actually a little bit of both. Both a real person and a character, which is Deborah Samson and her alias and character, Robert Shirtliff. Deborah was born to uh, rather ill-fated people. Um, Her mother had very little to speak of materially. And her father, while he had counted on getting a sizable inheritance from his father, and the local the local records state that he did get an equal share. He was convinced in his mind that somehow his brother-in-law had cheated him out of his inheritance. So instead of staying and helping his family, which by this time consisted of his wife and 5 children, once the inheritance came through and he was convinced that he'd been cheated, he left on the sea, and aside from a couple of returns, would ultimately never return after perishing at sea. Deborah's mother would try to keep the children together, but ultimately she had neither the financial means nor the constitution to care for them, so she wound up dispersing them among her relatives. Deborah would wind up with her aunt, with Deborah's aunt, not her mother's aunt, who would allow her to learn to read, learn to write. Deborah loved to learn. She feared dreadfully a life of illiteracy. And Deborah would learn to love nature. She would learn to love God. And as time passed, she learned a great deal. She was, according to her main biographer with the last name of Mann, she was a very smart, intelligent young woman. However, the last part of that sentence, woman, does bring up a couple of problems for Deborah. Because at the time, while women could travel, they were usually not able to travel unless they were linked with their husband, which her mother, still among the living, had been trying to set her up with for quite some time. She continued to try to rebuff him as her life continued, and ultimately would get his advances rebuked. But as Deborah continues to mature, she wants to travel. She wants to see what's out there in the world, and she can't do that as a woman. So instead of just consigning herself to fate, alas, it must be so I shall bear it with dignity, she asks, well, what if I was a man? Now, according to Mann, this... I just realized that. Sorry. According to Mann, she kind of wrestles with this in her mind for a couple of months. But she winds up testing it out. She gets a nice suit of man's clothes, does her hair properly, essentially makes herself look like a man. She wasn't ugly, but she was plain of face. She wasn't astonishingly beautiful, so it wouldn't have been one of those, wow, you gotta be the prettiest man I've ever seen moments, she could pull it off. And she did. She was actually able to deceive her relatives into thinking that she was a man with her alias of Robert Shirtliff. Most people didn't catch on. Some people did because, well, rumors had spread, but none of the rumors were ever confirmed. And so time would pass until in 1782, while Deborah was still dancing between male and female social lives, she would decide, ultimately, in the wake of a disaster, to enlist in the Continental Army, and she would be stationed at West Point for quite some time as the blooming young soldier of the regiment. She wound up endearing herself to the general, and ultimately was like the soldier. A lot of people really liked her. She was involved in several battles. One battle would actually injure her. Again, pardon me. She would receive a minor injury to the head and a shot straight to the thigh. Very painful injury, but she managed to conceal it from the doctor because she knew that if this injury was dressed by a physician, her secret would pretty well be out. So instead, what she decided to do was treat this wound herself. So, sterilizing the wound with rum and pulling it out with a pair of scissors and then sewing the wound shut herself in a feat of remarkable self-control and pain withstand. Endurance. Yeah, endurance, that's the word. She was actually able to keep her role going. Ultimately, she would wind up moving up to Philadelphia, and she would become fevered there, and a doctor, Dr. Billiff, I believe? Dr. Oh, where is it? I'm terrible with names. Dr. Barnabas Binney. How could I ever have forgotten that name? Anyhow, Dr. Barnabas Binney would discover her secret because everyone thought she was almost dead. One of the nurses said she's showing signs of life, and so in haste, he reaches his hand up the young man's shirt and discovers, wow, this isn't a man at all. But he keeps it secret between him and the nurse that was on hand, allowing her to continue her masquerade. Now, once they were done in Philadelphia, her and her unit would move into Ohio, where her fever would return and she would rest and recover with the tribe of Ohio Indians while her men continued to operate in the area. And possibly one of my favorite parts of the story, the Ohio Indians had with them a white girl who they were keeping as a slave. And she was able to save this white girl slave's life by purchasing the slave girl for his wife. That's what she was doing, is she essentially told the Ohio Indians, I want this one to be mine. And as the Ohio Indians believed that she was a man, they were fine with this arrangement, and it's really incredible. Ultimately, her secret was not found out by any means other than her own. She decided to tell the general, who had been her general the entire time, and she wasn't imprisoned, and she wasn't thought of less. It did kind of cause an epic stir in the camp that made very much confusion. And these guys were like, you were a woman the entire time? What? But she was able to, because of all of this, she was able to travel, she was able to fulfill her dream, and ultimately she was able to find love later in life, marry, give birth to 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter, before succumbing to another fever and a just old injury. That injury to the thigh that never properly healed would ultimately contribute in claiming her life. But Deborah Samson is one of the most remarkable figures of the Revolutionary War period, simply because even having a wound in the leg that didn't heal properly, she was still able to function as a soldier and still able to pretend to be a man, even in some incredibly awkward circumstances, such as when a young Baltimore heiress fell in love with him. That situation was really difficult for Deborah to get out of, but she was able to get out of it with minimal broken hearts along the way. I loved learning about Deborah this week. I hadn't really heard much of her beforehand, but now I want to look into her and find more information about this, my new favorite person and character in Revolutionary War history. God bless. I hope you all have a great week.